Ah, Mars. The red planet. It's the fourth planet from the Sun, right between the Earth and the asteroid belt. Long ago, when the Sun was dimmer, yet the Earth was an as yet undifferentiated ball of magma, Mars may have been the best place to be a living thing. Scientists suspect that Mars was once covered with oceans of liquid water. Unfortunately, time has been cruel to our neighbor. The geothermal energy that kept Mars warm for billions of years has long since radiated away into the hungry vacuum of space, never to return again. Now even Martian volcanoes rest in eternal stillness as Mars has been frozen in thermodynamic equilibrium. In a word, Mars is dead. What a dream it would be to bring life back to Mars. Well, it is a dream no more. And no, I'm not talking about Elon Musk. He's too busy pretending to be really good at Diablo 4 to work on Starship right now. And I mean, who can blame him? Video games are fucking awesome. In fact, let's play video games too, right now. I'm thinking Stationeers. Stationeers is a survival crafting game set in the near future after Elon Musk finally remembers to feed the engineers at SpaceX. If you haven't heard of it before, I'll say that Stationeers is kinda like an epic version of Minecraft, but only for the cool kids who like physics and space travel. Sound pretty swag? Good, 'cause that's what we're doing. I don't care if you have work to do, and neither does Elon, I guess, so buckle up, put your Cybertruck on autopilot, and light some fireworks. We're gaming today. We're hardcore gamers too, so we're gonna have to play the highest difficulty. With a brutal start, our lander will be destroyed during its descent, leaving us only with the bare minimum supplies to survive with. And on Stationeer difficulty, the engineers at SpaceX were told not to include straws by Mr. Musk because trans people use straws, so we're gonna have to open our helmet to drink water and eat. Get based and take your red pills because today we're going to the red planet to build a super sweet base. And if you have no idea what the fuck I'm going on about, watch my video tutorial for the moon first. We begin in a lander capsule, hurtling towards the Martian surface. The door bursts open and we see the red planet in its full glory. The first thing we need to do is dig up Martian dust to find some ores. As the crucial basis for most structural components, iron is first on the agenda, followed by copper for its conductive potential. With our two most essential ores obtained, I decide now is as good a time as any to start building up our space station. The first thing we need are iron frames. Iron frames are big blocks that will make up the majority of our space station structure. While we could weld them twice to make them airtight, we're in a bit of a rush here, so we'll just weld them up once to make them structurally sound. Once the structure is done, we can place a solar panel to start collecting power, alongside an autolathe and an arc furnace. The arc furnace uses electricity to smelt ores into ingots, while the autolathe turns those ingots into structural components like walls, frames, and doors. We'll need some iron, more copper, some silicon, and some shiny gold! Besides all that, we'll need some oxide ice and some volatile ice. Oxide is a great source of oxygen gas, while volatile ice can be used as a combustible fuel. Now that the sun has set and we have a good stockpile of ore in the mining belt, it's back to base. Personally, I recommend returning to your base before the sun sets so it's easier to find. Luckily, before it got dark, I turned to find the bearing of our base using our suit's inbuilt compass. Now earlier in the day, I set the autolathe to produce a gas furnace, and that will be a much quicker way to smelt ore than the arc furnace. Besides that, it also won't use up any of our very tiny power supply. All we need to do is chuck in a little bit of oxide, a little bit of volatiles, and hit the ignition button to make fire. Fire hot, fire melt, fire good. Something important to note are the temperature and pressure requirements of different metals. Silicon needs the highest temperature of any of the ores we collected, so that needs to go in first, followed by iron at 800 Kelvin, and then gold and copper have the same lower temperature requirement. Smelting ore will cool the furnace, both because ore needs heat to be melted and because all ores contain trapped gases that will be released during the melt process. After we've got our ores, we can start crafting. The first thing we'll want is an electronics printer. The electronics printer is similar to the auto lathe, but instead of structural components, it does electronic stuff. And right now, our tiny power supply is the first thing that needs to be upgraded. But that's going to need a couple minutes to craft, so we can get back to building up the base. As I said earlier, iron frames can be welded twice to generate an airtight seal, and we do need an airtight space to eat, drink, and grow plants in. You may have noticed at this point that everything is red. We landed with flares in our inventory, and because our power supply is so tiny right now, we're going to use those flares for lighting instead of our flashlight. Just light one, throw it back in your inventory, and you will be luminous. Once the electronics printer is done and built, we can make some logic chips and a sensor kit for horizontal solar tracking. This will greatly increase the amount of power we can generate with our little solar panel. We'll also want to finish our greenhouse soon. For this, we just need some walls, some windows, some doors, and some atmospheric equipment. For atmospheric equipment, we're going to need a hydraulic pipe bender, so I'll start crafting that as the sun rises. And because the sun is rising, it's back to mining. And we're going to mine hard. The main thing we need for our power upgrades is steel, but we're also going to need some more gold, some copper, and a little bit of extra iron. Never hurt nobody. Now that the sun is setting on day 2, it's back home to craft. While the pipe bender is finished, we can complete the airlock and upgrade the furnace. Right now, it's impossible to remove any of the old cold gas from earlier to make room for more hot gas. All we need is a valve and a vent on the output. Although I did temporarily pipe the output of the furnace straight to the vent, since the valve slows down the flow of gas. And I have a need for speed, epic Sonic style. With the furnace empty, we can slot the valve back into place and smelt everything we collected. Now let's get the greenhouse set up. Unlike the moon, Mars has an atmosphere, and that atmosphere has a small amount of toxin. So we'll need to make an outer vent for the airlock to remove all the gas from inside the greenhouse. This is also a great test to make sure the base is airtight. Once we've sucked the poison out, we can drop down our oxide ice and empty the waste tank. The room temperature carbon dioxide in our waste tank will help the oxide melt right away, though we could have waited for the sun. Regardless, the sun will help us heat the gas further over the next couple of days so our plants can grow faster. Currently, we are about to die because we're dehydrated, but now we can open our helmet and eat and drink. Besides that, our air tank is running low, so we'll need to use another active vent like we have in the airlock hooked up to a canister filler in order to fill the tank. Unfortunately, this will contaminate our perfectly clean supply of oxygen, so we'll need to add a nitrogen filter to our suit. As the sun rises yet again, it's back to mining, but not before starting to craft a huge battery with the electronics printer. With the fancy solar tracking we built earlier, our big battery in the area power controller is going to get filled just halfway through the day. And besides that, I'd much rather keep the battery inside the suit. Switching around the tiniest type of battery between the tools in the suit gets pretty tedious after a while. Just like the moon, the third day is best spent mining for all the basic alloys, especially solder and electrum, but we'll also want to get as much nickel as possible to make huge batches of Constantan and Invar tomorrow night. And just like before, it's important to smelt ores in a specific order in order to use our fuel most efficiently. Because of the greater distance and the inverse square law, we only get roughly 70% the amount of solar radiation as we have on the moon. This means cooling the base is not such an immediate problem, but we do need more solar panels or better solar tracking for our power. While on the moon we landed near the equator, on Mars we land at a non-zero latitude, which means that the sun is going to take a lower arc across the sky. This is why we are using horizontal solar tracking instead of vertical tracking like the moon. But for even better power production, we want dual-axis solar tracking. Regardless, the sun is rising, so now we be mining. Today is the day for Invar and Constantin. Both of these alloys require a very high pressure to be made, and that means we need to use a lot of fuel. And it's the same amount of fuel for a tiny batch as it is for a big batch, so we're going to go big and then we can go home. Upon returning, for no good reason in particular, I decide I want to build the potato growing apparatus. And then after that, for many reasons, we'll want the infrastructure to program and use our IC chip. While we could just plop down a couple more logic chips to make dual-axis solar tracking, I find it much easier to do this with a programmable chip. The program is super simple, and I'll link a script from the workshop for you to subscribe to, and I'll also briefly describe how it works at the end of the video. Otherwise, go ahead and like and subscribe to see a fully fledged programming tutorial in the future, or check out my Steam guide, which will also be linked in the description. Here you can see a mistake that actually made me want to fucking scream. I accidentally wasted 15 copper and 15 iron on 3 extra programming motherboards because I forgot to cycle the selection wheel on the printer. I almost quit right there, out of sheer, unadulterated, and entirely misplaced rage. But I did stick with it. But it did mean that I had to run around a bit at the end of the night to find some extra gold so I could finish the IC chip. Now we're really tracking the sun's location, putting all 3 of our solar panels on the maximal sigma grind set. There really is nothing better than getting beta silicon to do the work for you. But I need ore. Ore never changes. After mining, I finally decide it's a good time to make Constantin and Invar so we can progress to sensor lenses. To get there, we'll need a tool printer, an advanced furnace, and some crafting machine upgrade parts. While we need some more nickel and gold to make the ever so crucial Inconel for sensor lenses, we currently have everything we need for a heavy mining drill. So let's make that and get to mining. Now, it's time to replace our lame gas furnace with the awesome advanced furnace. The advanced furnace is required to make super alloys like Inconel. At the same time, I decide to expand the platform and shield our solar panels. You see, all current planets with atmospheres and Stationeers, so not the moon, have storms. The first storm always occurs on day 8, so you need to make sure your solar panels are protected before then. Most of your equipment besides solar panels won't really be damaged by storms, but any loose items on the ground will be swept away and damaged, so I'm also going to work on shielding the crafting platform and adding a door. On later planets with more hostile environments, this will already have been done because we need a safe vacuum space to work in. Europa is next, and we're going to do this there, so stay tuned. Now earlier, I really did kind of waste my time setting up the potato trays, because I had to wait until just now with Invar to make an arc welder. The gas welder kind of sucks to use indoors because it heats the surrounding atmosphere a great deal while also introducing toxins into our otherwise clean mix of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Anyway, with our potatoes finally growing, we can smelt Inconel and make sensor lenses. As you can see here, sensor lenses reveal the ore right beneath our very feet. Now we know exactly where to find exactly what we want. Even at night, in minutes, we can have a full belt of precisely the ore we want. While flushing the furnace after the mining expedition, I make another huge mistake and narrowly save myself from a critical explosion. The vent I'd been using for both the regular furnace and now the advanced furnace was halfway inside that sealed area I made to protect the solar panels. The heat and pressure damaged everything, but I managed to save it just in time, although not before the pressure built up enough to yeet me backwards as I just barely diffused that bomb brewing inside. Now for a quick explanation of the dual-axis solar tracking. Dual-axis solar tracking is our best bet for renewable power on most worlds, so it's essential that we understand how to implement it. Let's think back to the logic chips we used in the last video. We read a value from a daylight sensor with a logic reader, and we write that value to all the solar panels with a batch writer. We might also need a logic memory and a logic math unit if the alignment isn't perfectly planned out. Instead of a big clunky array with wires going everywhere, we can just use one line of code for each of those logic chips, hooked into one tiny machine. Instead of a big clunky array of all of that, twice over, we can just use one line of code for each of those logic chips. To read a value, we use the load instruction, or L. To store that value, we need to use one of 16 registers. We can use the original name of the register, like R0, or we can name the register before using it with the alias instruction. The math is pretty self-explanatory. Add will add two numbers and put that value in a third register, and sub will subtract two registers and put that number into a third. When placed facing directly upward, the daylight sensor's vertical value is always going to be wrong. So we need to take 90 and subtract the vertical value from it in order to write the correct value to the solar panels. Also, depending on how our solar panels are rotated relative to the daylight sensor, we may need to add an offset to the horizontal value. That is either going to be 90, 180, or 270. Once we have our two corrected values from the daylight sensor, we can now write those values to the solar panels. While we write to a device with the set instruction S, we write to many devices of the same type using SB, or the set batch instruction. Now it just needs to loop and it's almost done. This will actually work as is, but Stationeers can only do its physics calculations so fast. The speed of this calculation is 2 per second. So every second we have 2 ticks where things can change. So that means that there's no point in changing the solar panels any faster than twice a second. To wait for the current tick to finish, we use the yield instruction. Now we are cooking. Anyway, with the near catastrophe of the exploding solar shield averted, I decide to end it there. Our base still needs a cooling system, but I covered that on the moon, so I'll leave that be. Tune in next time for Europa, a planet rich in ice-cold oxygen. The cold kills our batteries, and the sun is even dimmer than on Mars, so we'll be desperate for power. But if we can hold on to some energy, the cold oxygen that surrounds us will be to our advantage. Till next time.